Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person in Mumbai, so I'm speaking to you via Zoom from the UK, and I hope you're having a good conference, and I look forward to following it myself. So I'm going to just present a few slides on the subject of the streaming platforms, the global streaming platforms, a new window for animation. So we put together some research we've done into catalogs of on-demand players, including the role of animation in those catalogs, and some additional research into production of original animation. And I'm presenting that to you here for the first time. So just to tell you a bit about OMDIA, we're a UK-based research company. We were created in 2020 by the merger of various other companies. So we focus on technology, media, and telecoms, and we have about 400 analysts around the world. And one of the areas that I focus on is programming, so program production and financing, and that's some of the research I'm going to be drawing on today. So the contents of the presentation are basically 5 different sections. First of all, we're going to look at the overall TV and online video landscape with a particular focus on subscription video, even though, as we'll see, advertising is a very major source of funding, particularly in India for online services. Then I'm going to look at how important animation is in the content mix for online video services. How much animation is actually being originated for streaming platforms. Obviously, they're famous for investing a lot of money in new programming, and how much of that money is going into animation? Is there room for improvement? Then I'm going to look at the key players, and these are global players. So obviously that will include Netflix, Amazon, and Disney Plus. But in a final section, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the situation in India, in particular the global services, what they're doing in terms of original animation production in India. So first of all, looking at the overall landscape. Subscription video on demand, or SVOD, is already well established as a mass market phenomenon. It's grown very quickly, but the phase we're going into now is a phase where the market is maturing. So subscriptions will continue to grow over our forecast period, which is 5 years to 2027, but the growth rates are starting to slow. We obviously saw an explosion, particularly in 2020 during the lockdown, when we were all stuck at home, and many of us turned to online subscription services as a source of entertainment. So we saw big increases in 2020, also lots of new launches. And that growth, as I said, will continue, but the growth rate is going to be slowing. So in 2020, online video subscriptions overtook pay TV globally. That means the number of accounts, if you like. So there are still more households with pay TV than SVOD households. And we expect that to continue to be the case for many more years. Many households, of course, have both pay TV and SVOD. And we expect that to be 43% of households worldwide will have both a pay TV subscription and at least one SVOD subscription. And that has increased from just 15% in 2015. So we have seen a big increase in people who are prepared to pay for video services adding SVOD. Most homes have more than one SVOD service. So we think that was 2.2 in 2021. And that's obviously a key statistic with the number of online SVOD services vying for the subscriber dollar, rupee, euro, in how many services are people going to take in their packages. So looking at revenue, as I mentioned, this is a maturing market, and it's advertising revenues which are growing most quickly now, more quickly than online subscription. And by 2027, we predict it will be a larger source of revenue than subscription for online video services and pay TV combined. The growth will be a CAGR of 16% in online video revenues, advertising revenues over the next 5 years. We expect them to total $361 billion in 2027. And traditional TV advertising revenue is fairly flat. So it was $159 billion in 2021. Again, this is worldwide. and we don't expect very much growth, really marginal growth, actually a decline in real terms over the next 5 years. And this is the year when ad-supported online video will overtake TV advertising. And by ad-supported online video, that is any video by a native digital platform like YouTube or Facebook, and also broadcaster video on demand advertising as well combined. Paid for online subscription services in general generated revenue of 70.5 billion in 2021. And as you can see, that will remain smaller than online advertising in the forecast period, even though we expect that market to continue to grow with a CAGR of 8.4%. And then traditional pay TV revenue, we're not seeing any growth there. In fact, we're seeing a slight decline over the next 5 years. Looking at the worldwide market, here we've selected the top 12 SVOD services globally. A lot of US-based services there, as you might expect, but also 3 Chinese services. So the critical mass of China means that services like Youku Tudou and iQIYI are in the top 10 of SVOD services. Netflix and Amazon Prime were the sort of forerunners. They were first to launch global streaming services back in 2012, and we've seen a number of launches over the last 3 years. Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus appearing in 2019, HBO Max and Peacock following the next year, and then Paramount Plus launching last year. And again, this is very much a focus on the big global platforms. There are something like 5,000 online video services of different types worldwide. So we're just looking at the big players, but a small sample of the overall market activity in online video. And finally, on this landscape setting, a key event has happened this year already. So Disney Plus has overtaken Netflix, or rather Walt Disney streaming services have overtaken Netflix with about 222 million subscribers reported at the end of Q2. And that is Disney Plus Hotstar, ESPN Plus, and Hulu. So maybe an unfair comparison because there are 4 different services. But Disney certainly moved into streaming with Netflix very much in its sights in 2019. And its growth has been faster than anticipated. And indeed, it's already catching up Netflix in terms of global subscribers. In terms of revenues, Disney is still slightly behind Netflix. So in Q2, it reported revenues of $5 billion compared to just under $8 billion for Netflix. But of course, it's closing fast. And of course, that total does not include Disney's linear services, its movies, theme parks, etc. So Disney is becoming an increasingly important player in streaming, and Netflix, having built up an enormous lead, is now losing its leadership, but still a very important player, of course. So now I'm going to talk a bit about how important animation is to online video services, those that we've just been looking at. So what we're looking at here is an analysis we do of on-demand catalogs in the US. Of course, there are local differences, particularly for Amazon Prime Video, which has a lot of variations in its local offerings. But the US is a good way of looking at the sort of approach of these players to the market worldwide. So again, looking at Q2 2022, you can see that Crunchyroll, which is an anime-focused service now owned by Sony, had the biggest percentage of animation in its catalog. Not surprising because it is a anime-only service. But you can also see that Disney Plus has a much bigger focus on animation, particularly children's animation, but also lots of sort of comedy animation in its catalog. So in Q2, about 35% of the titles in the Disney Plus catalog in the US were animation, and that's a lot more than Netflix. Netflix had 12% animation, and HBO Max a similar amount, and the newcomers, Peacock 6%, 10% for Peacock, 6% for Paramount, and only 5% for Amazon Prime Video. Looking again at those catalog lineups, these are the 6 key SVOD players. You can see that for Netflix in particular, scripted comedy and drama is its main genre. Paramount and Peacock, the latest additions to the market, also highlight scripted, but also show a lot of unscripted content, so reality shows and documentary shows in addition. And again, you can see that Disney has a strong emphasis on animation. So as I mentioned, 35% of its catalog in Q2 was animation, compared to 30% for scripted. So I think the other way of looking at this is that for all of the key SVOD players, they all include some animation. So the animation audience is obviously children, preschool children, school-age children, but also to some extent adults with sort of primetime comedy animation shows, and also anime, which is predominantly Japanese, which is sort of both aimed at children and adults. So here we're looking at the overall number of titles on on-demand services rather than a percentage breakdown. So Tubi was the main player, and Tubi is an advertising VOD service, so completely advertising funded, a very deep catalog, which our research shows consumers, their main priority with on-demand is catalog depth, range of choice. So Tubi is a free service, advertising funded, and it's supporting that. Also, Crunchyroll, with its anime offering, has just under 1,400 titles available in Q2. And you can see that the others are pretty much in the same kind of ballpark in terms of animation and anime that they're offering. And a big part of animation, and perhaps one of the advantages that the likes of Disney and Peacock and Paramount Plus can bring to bear, is their rich archive of theatrical animation as well as TV series animation. So if we're looking at the amount of animated movies, theatrical movies in catalogs, Tubi again comes up on top, but Disney is not far behind. And there's quite a big difference between Disney, which of course has the Pixar library, as well as the Disney feature film library, some Fox animation as well from its acquisition of Fox, is not too far behind. So theatrical, both library and theatrical movies coming into the services after their theatrical run are a big part of the Disney offer. And we'll see that feature animation is becoming quite significant for Netflix as well. So now looking a bit at how much of that animation is being originated. So by originated, we mean either produced for that platform and transmitted for the first time by that platform, or it just means that it was shown for the first time on that platform, maybe on an exclusive pre-buy. So how much animation is being originated by the streamers? Well, origination, is obviously a key part of the offer for most of these SVOD players in particular. And that's very much a classic pay TV strategy. So there are multiple reasons for investing in original content, which I've tried to put here on this slide. So one obviously is appealing to new subscribers, giving people a reason for signing up. Sign up to this service, and this is where you can see this program or this movie. It's nowhere else. Origination also helps with branding and image. It gives the platform something to promote, as well as giving people a reason for signing up. And existing subscribers, if they feel like they're getting something new, something they haven't seen before, something they can't get anywhere else, it's also a good churn reduction strategy. It keeps existing subscribers happy, renewing, on board. Having original content also means that rather than licensing content from a third party, platforms like Netflix have more visibility and predictability about what their program lineup is going to look like in the future. And then a fifth point is that if they own content, if they have the underlying rights to content, they can also generate new revenues by licensing the content to third parties. That is not something Netflix has done to date. That doesn't mean they won't necessarily move into it, but that is another reason for owning original content and investing in original content. But of course, if it goes the wrong way and your program doesn't work, then you are left with a program on your hands that you can't necessarily amortize. And obviously it's safer in some cases to license programming which you know is going to be successful and you know has an audience built in with it. And the last reason which is applying in some countries is regulation. So many countries are bringing in rules about local content in particular, which doesn't necessarily imply origination. But some of those rules do also encourage investment in new programming, particularly in Europe. So looking again at these at animation in this context, you can see that Apple has quite a small catalog, but a high amount of it is originated, and 61% of the animation on Apple TV Plus in the second quarter of 2022 was original to Apple TV Plus. Others quite a lot lower. So Paramount Plus, Disney, Amazon, all sort of between 7 and 5%. But you can see here that Netflix is significantly higher. So 46% of the animation on Netflix in the US, again, in Q2 2022, was original. And that's a considerable amount more, of course, than both Disney Plus and Amazon. So looking in more detail at Netflix, over the last few years, so it started originating in 2013. And since then, in terms of specifically animation, Netflix has produced or aired 489 titles by our count. And that is considerably more than any of the other streaming players, as you can see from this chart. Amazon started origination about the same time as Netflix, but does a considerable amount less in all genres. It did start with quite a few animation series when it moved into origination and developing new products, but it hasn't really it hasn't completely left animation, but it hasn't developed in anything like the same way as Netflix has. Other players like Disney and Paramount and Peacock, which owns DreamWorks Animation, are clearly also favoring animation, not necessarily animation origination, but have a lot of animation in their catalogs, but not producing as much yet. So now I'm going to look in a little more detail at the key players, some of those I've been talking about. So the main one is Netflix. It's really the powerhouse of streaming animation. It's got the biggest amount of origination, not necessarily the biggest amount of animation titles, as we've seen, but does a great deal of animation. So in 2021, last year, it actually originated 95 titles last year alone. Its main target audience is children. So we think about 384 of the titles that Netflix has produced to date were aimed at children, preschool children or school-aged children. But it also has a lot of comedy animation. And some of those series like BoJack Horseman and Big Mouth are among its most renewed shows, so the ones which have gone into the largest number of series. So animation aimed at grown-ups is also a big part of Netflix's focus. Mostly it has worked with studios based in the US, but animation is very much a global industry. There are studios all around the world, including India. And last year in 2021, Netflix ordered animation from producers in 10 other countries, including 12 titles from Japan, 10 from Canada, and so on, but just one title last year from India. Another look at Netflix. What's becoming increasingly clear about Netflix is a focus on feature animation. Of course, not released in theaters. You might call it feature-length animation. So in 2020, Netflix's content chief, Ted Sarandos, was quoted saying that they've been ramping up their feature animation. He was very happy with the results of their first project, Klaus, which was produced in Europe, because it was nominated for Best Animated Feature in that year. And he said at the time that Netflix is aiming to release 6 big feature animation titles a year, which he correctly observed is actually more than any of the other major US players. And it's got a very busy slate of upcoming features, and that includes Pinocchio from Guillermo del Toro and 2 films from the UK studio Aardman Animation. And most significantly, perhaps earlier this year, Netflix agreed to acquire a full-service animation studio called Animal Logic. So Animal Logic is based in Sydney, Australia, and it has a really strong track record of producing feature animation mostly for partners. They include Happy Feet, Guardians of the Galaxy, and the Lego movies. And we believe this is a sign that Netflix is very keen to develop into more of a studio by owning its own animation studio. So of course, Disney has a big animation studio, has several animation studios. So Netflix isn't going to become Walt Disney, but is becoming more like Walt Disney. And by investing and owning more of these feature animation shows, particularly if they turn into big franchises, it will have all of the advantages that I was talking about on another slide, an earlier slide, including developing its licensing and merchandising revenue streams outside its main business of streaming. Looking at Disney Plus, so far it has been quite sparing in the amount of production that it's done outside its own studios. So it's produced one series, I think, or 2 seasons of Hanuman in India, despite India being a very important market for Disney Plus Hotstar. As I say here, it launched in 2019. It's moved very aggressively into streaming and really was targeting Netflix in particular. It was not happy with the lead that Netflix had built up in the world, and it was very much focusing on making up lost ground. And as we can see, it has very much done that. Its release strategy with regard to Disney Plus, as far as animation concerned, is a work in progress. So a lot of studios released animation movies first on their streaming services during the shutdown because theaters, cinemas were shut. That doesn't seem to be a continuing strategy. They seem to have tried that, but they still support theaters and they're still releasing their big animated movies in cinemas first. So Disney Plus, or the Disney streaming services, now have more subscribers combined than Netflix, which is quite significant. So looking at Amazon now, it has a more selective approach to original investment generally. It tends to focus on markets which are important to it, which include India, for example. So it does a lot of local production in India, including some animation. But in terms of animation, it's still committed, and most recently at the Annecy Festival, Melissa Wolf, who's head of animation, said it was certainly on the lookout for new ideas, in particular anything aimed at a 16 and up audience. So that sort of key blockbuster movie audience where you get older kids and families rather than younger kids. So she's looking for franchises like everyone else to create bigger words. So Amazon does seem to be committed to animation as long as the right project comes along. HBO Max is slightly more in doubt. So HBO is kind of in the process of merging with Discovery, or has merged with Discovery, but there are lots of cutbacks going on, including the cancellation of a lot of animated series which were going on HBO Max, which launched in May 2020. So we have to say that the future investment plans in terms of their size are somewhat in doubt because of the cancellation of all of those shows, but it has definitely got a place for animation on the service, not just through Cartoon Network, which of course is the kids brand, but also a lot of adult animation branded as Adult Swim in the US, and also anime. So there certainly will be animation on HBO Max going forward, but it's in doubt about how much will be original and how much is actually going to be commissioned over the next few years as the service continues its international rollout. Paramount Plus and Peacock, the latest arrivals, so they were the sort of the last to launch. So Peacock on the right there started in 2020. It's owned by NBC Universal, which owns DreamWorks Animation. So DreamWorks Animation still has a production deal with Netflix, but that's still in place, but an increasing amount of DreamWorks's output is going on to Peacock and also Hulu, which is still partly owned by NBC Universal. So it was a really important partner for Netflix, but its slight withdrawal probably explains one reason why Netflix is doing so much investment in animation. Paramount Plus, owned by Paramount, formerly Viacom CBS, has actually been involved in streaming for quite a long time. It was originally CBS All Access. Like Peacock, also has a place for animation, partly drawing on its libraries. Paramount obviously owns Nickelodeon, the kids channel, but also aiming at adult audiences. And both of these services have access to movies in the first SVOD window after their theatrical release. So just finally, I'm going to look a bit at the situation in India, particularly for streaming services. So what we're looking at here is the leading SVOD players. So these are our estimates on the number of subscriptions that all of the key players had at the end of the last 3 years, or will have at the end of this year. So at the end of 2021, Disney Plus Hotstar was well ahead with just under 40 million subscribers at the end of the year. It has huge leadership in India. So we think Amazon Prime Video had 7.3 million and Netflix 6.2 million subscribers at the end of 2021. Unusually, because in most of the world, Netflix is quite well ahead of Amazon. Amazon is bigger in India than Netflix, and that's part of the approach which I mentioned, where Amazon focuses on markets which are particularly important to it as a retailer, and India is one of those countries. So Disney Plus Hotstar has lost the streaming rights to IPL cricket from next year, and we have taken that into account in our forecast. So we did reduce our forecast slightly for Disney Plus Hotstar, but we still think it will continue to be the biggest SVOD streaming player in India, because as well as the IPL, it also has other strings to its bow, including a lot of original content production, and it's doing a lot in more Indian languages besides Hindi. So we do a wave of consumer research twice a year, and that includes India. So what we're looking at here is the last time we asked our panel in India, when you first subscribed. So these are people who subscribe to a pay TV or an SVOD services. We asked them when they subscribed, which of these types of content were they most interested in, or was their household most interested in? And the key point here is that children's content is not a prime reason for people to sign up for on demand compared to TV shows and movies and sport. In most cases, it's quite well down. It's important, but it's quite well down the list of reasons for people to subscribe, which may be one reason, well, it is one reason that there is less investment in original animation in India by the major platforms and also the Indian players. So just finally, there are Indian productions in animation. There is room for growth. So I'm sure we will see more, but so far there's been a fairly limited amount done by the international platforms in India. So as I'm saying here, Amazon has actually done 3 different titles, more than 1 season of some of those. Disney Hotstar has done a couple of seasons of The Legend of Hanuman, and Netflix has done a number of seasons and specials of Mighty Little Beam, which I think was one of its first international animation productions. So there's room for growth, and I'm sure we will see more growth. So key takeaways, I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go through these all. But I think the key message really is that there is room for growth, despite animation and children's animation not being the major focus of the international SVOD players or local players in India. There is space for animation on those services. And the key thing is that people like Netflix are actually commissioning content for a global platform. So you do have the opportunity of reaching audiences, not just in your own market, but worldwide. So thank you very much for listening. I look forward to the rest of the conference. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can see I'm on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to hear from you. So thank you very much.